Good evening, everyone. You can cheer that. That's a good one to cheer for. I'm Josh Siegel on behalf of MoMA's Department of Film. Welcome to the opening night of Doc Fortnight. And I'm joined up here by Team MoMA, who worked tirelessly to make this festival possible. So I want to thank them all and acknowledge them individually. Kathy Brew. Some of you, I'm sure, know that Kathy was responsible for some of the past editions of Doc Fortnight, and she's also organized, it's a really hot crowd. She's also organized the special sidebar for this year's festival, Nonfiction Plus, which examines expanded cinema and more daring forms of moving images that go beyond the traditional cinema, traditional theater. Next up, Olivia Perdite. Sean Egan. Sturgios Dinopoulos. Francisco Valente. Carson Parrish. And we had somewhere, but she disappeared, Maureen Masters, so thanks to Maureen. And I also want to thank our education department for helping out to make this theater more accessible for this evening. So after screening hundreds upon hundreds of films, this is what we have to say for ourselves. We have some, I have the numbers here, and hang on a second, my phone just died. 12 world premieres, 17 North American premieres, and 14 US premieres from 38 countries. And they range in length from 1 minute, Lucrecia Martel's AI, to the 14-hour epic Women Make Film, a new road movie through cinema by Mark Cousins. So I expect you all to be here for all of them, and all of the ones in between. There is a brochure upstairs. I hope you had a chance to pick it up. It's at the film desk. It has the full schedule and scintillating descriptions of all of the films. Tonight, we are here to celebrate Nicole Newnham and Jim LeBrecht's Crip Camp. And as you probably know, only a few days ago, won the Audience Award at Sundance. And it's easy to see why. You will soon see why. It's as funny as it is inspiring. I actually had never even heard of Camp Jened until I saw this film. And even now, if you look it up on Wikipedia, you won't find it. So someone out here has to rectify that. But I was just delighted to know that there are kids who had the time of their lives in summer camp, since mine was such a harrowing experience. And, only my parents would send me to a camp called Dark Waters, which, by the way, still exists. I did check that. That still exists. Anyway, I want to offer our deepest, deepest thanks to our friends at Netflix, many of whom are here tonight, for making tonight's premiere possible, as well as our friends at Higher Ground Productions, Michelle and Barack Obama's new film outfit. And together, Netflix and Higher Ground are batting 1,000, because if you haven't filled out your Oscar pools yet, you would be well placed to put your money on the extraordinary film American Factory, which is up for and we had the great pleasure of premiering it, thanks to them, when we did a tribute to Julia Reichert, the great documentarian. So we're very, very fortunate to have with us for the Q&A Judy Heumann. And you'll realize how truly fortunate we are once you've seen the film, if you don't know that already. And she will join the filmmakers and me on stage, but for now I hope you'll join me in welcoming the directors and producers of tonight's film, Nicole Newnham and Jim LeBrecht.
This is an amazing experience. It's such a special, incredible screening of the film, and we're so happy to be here. And we also want to thank our partner in crime, our other producer, Sarah Boulder. The amazing team at Netflix who has been helping us throughout this whole rollout of the film and has been so extraordinary. We want to thank Higher Ground, and especially our executive producer, Priya Swaminathan, who brought so much to this film, and our other extraordinary executive producer, Howard Gertler. And we're very thankful to the Museum of Modern Art for all of their work around access, and to Netflix and MoMA for helping us show this screening with open captions.
Well, I don't think there's been this many people from Camp Jened in one room for quite a while. If you went or were to Camp Jened, would you just make your presence known, please? As you're hopefully going to see, Camp Jened was an extraordinary place. And it was a story that it's a place that I've held in my heart ever since I went there. And in my career of working in documentary film, I really hoped the story would not be lost to time about how that place motivated so many people to live a life of their choosing. And that how we fought to make sure that as many of us could have that. So thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you at the Q&A.
You should know that the only other time I remember a standing ovation was for Jean Moreau, so you're in good company. You're in good company. So Judy, I have to say, you've spent a lifetime making the impossible possible, so how come you couldn't get veal parmesan for the kids?
I was too young.
You must be haunted by that still, no?
I am.
So Nicole, you're an Emmy Award-winning filmmaker. You've been in the business for quite some time, and Jim, you've worked on a number of Nicole's films as a sound designer, sound editor. But talk a little bit about how this project came to be.
Well, yeah, I had the good fortune of working with Jim on my 3 previous feature documentaries. And we had a great time and a great collaboration. And over time, Jim, I think, became increasingly vocal about representation for people with disabilities in the media and fighting for access for filmmakers with disabilities. And we just started talking a lot about that, and eventually I got lucky enough that one day he decided to take me out to lunch and pitch me on a few stories that he had up his sleeve.
And I just said, oh, by the way, there's this summer camp I went to, and I think there's a story there, a story about these people moving from New York out to Berkeley, and would you be interested in making a film about it? 4.5 years later.
Well, I mean, one of the extraordinary things is that
Just like Woodstock.
I didn't get to be there. One of the remarkable things is that video itself was in its infancy when you were at the camp. It was essentially, at least for the general public, only about 2 or 3 years old. So one of the remarkable things about the film is how much of this footage still survives. Was this ever used in other contexts when they were making these videos? Were they shown in another context?
Well, there was this infamous, in fact, there was a videotape floating around the community in Berkeley. The People's Video Theater did produce mini documentary on the crab epidemic at Camp Jeanette for the handicapped. I'm out in San Diego going to college, and every once in a while I get a call from my father, and he's like, your crab documentary's on again.
I'd just like to acknowledge Ben Levine from the
Ben
People's
Levine.
Video Theater, who's here with us tonight.
And for me, one of the most moving moments in the film is when the kids are looking at themselves on screen. And, you know, in some way, it's presumably the first time they've ever seen moving images of themselves. And presumably one of the first times they've ever had mediated images of themselves as subjects rather than objects. And I was very moved by this notion, and I wanted to actually talk to you, Judy, because I know that for the last couple of years you've dedicated yourself to a paper that white paper you delivered to the Ford Foundation about mediated images of people with disabilities, and I wondered if you could speak a little bit about it. I mean, because it is one of the obstacles still to overcome.
Well, I think we have a great audience of people, many of whom are doing work in media. So the paper itself, for those of us who've been struggling with this issue, was not so surprising. But at the end of the day, what it basically does is document the lack of representation of disabled people in the media and looks at representation of other minority groups in the media and looks at how that has come about. And by the ability to have other organizations established that really focus on issues for women or people of various colors, et cetera. And so we're all still trying really to work on trying to get some structure that would enable there to be a place for disabled people to convene. There's lots of different work that's going on by many people here in dance and acting and film, but there's still no real cohesive voice where people aren't struggling against each other in particular things they're trying to do. But I want to say something that's maybe a little bit off topic, but so many of us went to California, and I think this is an important issue to raise. I think one of the reasons why we were able to do what we did in California was because we lived in Berkeley, which was not just a quote-unquote radical place, because quite frankly, I think we were doing some more radical things in Brooklyn and Manhattan, et cetera, than was going on in California. But I think the fact that it was a smaller community. You know, in New York, there were 7 million of us. The lack of accessible transportation and many other things made it more difficult. And for that period of time, in Berkeley, it was much smaller. Not having curb cuts was, of course, a problem, but the streets weren't that crowded. And there was public transportation by the time many of us got out there. The BART system was accessible. So I think, you know, we were able to do things there that were more difficult to do here. Although I think it's incredible to see the great work that's gone on in New York City and New York State, where people really have had to struggle against many obstacles that didn't exist in a smaller community. So I just have to say that I never would have done what I have been able to do, and I mean this sincerely, if it wasn't for Brooklyn.
You know, I did a little test for myself when we realized we were going to be showing this about a month ago. I was reading the Times and the Washington Post and looking for articles in which there were examples of violations of ADA. And I counted about 25 in the last month of major articles. But the most egregious, and this is just to perhaps challenge a little bit what you just said about the situation in New York, obviously 50 years have passed and we're still building elevators in New York City subway system. Okay, fair or not, fair enough. It's a system that was built in 1904, but the most egregious example to me, and I quote, in September 18th, the New York Times' lead article was, "Why can't New York City build more gems like this Queens Library? The Hunters Point Community Library is one of the finest public buildings New York has produced this century." 3 weeks later, The Gothamist reported that the building's main design feature is a staircase and balcony with resplendent views of the city, unfortunately inaccessible to anyone who can't walk up or down stairs. And although the Hunters Point Library has an elevator, it doesn't stop at 3 fiction sections. Which really leads me to the question to you, Judy and Jim. Do you read fiction?
Well, I think, why is that happening here?
This is a $41 million library that has been in the works for upwards of 15 years.
It's a violation. So how many of you have filed a lawsuit?
Well, I think that currently they're having to redesign the entire balcony viewing area, and they only have one elevator, and I don't know if that can be fixed.
I mean, I can't explain it, but I think there should be some real repercussion for that happening. And I guess the question really would be is why do people let that happen and not stop it as it was moving forward? That really is inexcusable, and whoever was approving the plans, they also should really be in deep trouble because clearly those plans should not have been approved.
So, a question for the two of you, Nicole and Jim. At what point did you find a form for the film? Because you had all of this rich material to work with and from, but the story is such a vast and profound story. So, how did you manage to harness all this material into such a wonderful film?
We had incredible editors working with us on the film. Andy Gersh and Eileen Meyer and Mary Lamson. Mary Lamson edited a lot of seminal political films in the 70s. And I think one thing that we always wanted to try to do was to kind of immerse people in the world of the camp and let them kind of discover it for themselves, along with Jim, as he discovered it, over what feels like the shape of a summer. And that people would be kind of learning through experience. And I think what you said about new media is really true. I think the kind of wonder of what Ben and Howard and the People's Video Theater were doing and the kind of almost naivete with which it was being filmed and participated in, it just has this joyous energy and kind of it really does feel so unmediated. You just feel like you're there. And when we first got the footage, which took a long time to track down, but luckily Ben and Howard were in the process of digitizing it and restoring it, and we were able to work with them. We just felt like we could sit there and watch it for hours and hours and hours. And so what we were able to do is kind of, I think, try to have the viewer feel like they're kind of on this immersive journey. And then the question was, would we be able to figure out a way to shift people's point of view to that point of view of someone who had been on that journey so that they would then see the history that evolved through that lens. And I think we were able to do that, but it was tricky because the news footage that you move into after you leave the camp was very hard to track down. Most of the archival that Evan White shot had been destroyed in a fire, for instance. Lots of the material that had been given by the community to archives to preserve had never even been gone through. So we would request boxes of pictures and footage, and we'd be told, well, we haven't actually gone through that yet, so you can't access it, and we'd have to fight to make it available. So it really was kind of this editing journey to figure out how do we kind of continue that immersive verite feel that you started out in the camp so that you could feel like you were following friends on a journey through that history as it evolved.
I think that the shape of the film is based on this extraordinary collaboration that I feel very fortunate to have been part of. And that having the lens of my 63 years of life and being able to share my experience, and for us consulting and talking with each other was rare, was intimate, it was truthful. I remember driving back from an interview, and I had said a couple of things in an interview, and I called Nicole and said, you know what, I don't think I was right. You know, I thought about it a little bit longer. And so, but the trust built between us and our editors, the Sundance Lab that we are very fortunate to go to, provided a safe place for myself and everybody else who was interviewed for this film to believe that our story would be handled with love and respect and accuracy.
You know, I think from the very beginning, we wanted it to be a community-told story, made collaboratively with the community. So, Judy, I remember we were driving back from a shoot in Brooklyn, and you said, I like this project because we're doing this together, you know, which was the spirit of the building and the spirit of the movement. And we did try to bring that into the process, you know, both with ourselves in the edit room, but also as we consulted and talked to and worked with and kind of dove into this with everybody who's been a part of the project.
I want to give the audience a chance to ask a few questions. Let me just ask the final one of Judy. So there's a moment of great solidarity between the Black Panthers and during the sit-in. But I am wondering, you know, obviously the disability rights movement coincided with many other rights movements, civil rights movements. Were there ever tensions among the different movements? Did you ever feel that, you know, did you always feel that you were fighting for a common cause, or did you sometimes feel that the disability community was marginalized in some ways, even by those other communities?
Oh. I think what was going on in the Bay Area at that time, Kitty Cohn, who unfortunately passed away, was an amazing organizer. She'd been a member of the Socialist Workers' Party, and she had a number of friends who were also involved with work that we were doing, both in the demonstration and other periods of time. And we had made it really a principle of the work that we were doing to work together as much as possible on various issues that we're dealing with, like budgets with the county or the city or the state, and supporting each other. So I think there was a camaraderie which was built up, and a reciprocity that really came about because we had worked together. The bottom line is, though, that you know, the non-disability community, regardless of its background, still didn't and is learning about disability, the breadth of disability, racial, poverty, etc. And so it's, you could see, I think, some of the footage that you intentionally used. I mean, Glide Memorial Church and others, that really showed the work that had been going on for a reasonable number of years. And some of the people who didn't get highlighted, but were with us in Washington, D.C., were lawyers who came from various political movements that were also doing work with us in the area of disability. Ed Roberts really also, you know, had for many years been working with other groups. And so I think the Bay Area at that time, which we said, I think, briefly in the film, really was kind of ripe because we were quite different, I think, than most other parts of the community. Now, some of the friction or tension that could go on sometimes was if people felt that CIL was dominating what was going on over some of the other organizations in the Bay Area. And I think, you know, we tried to be very collaborative. And I think in the end, people did not leave with any animosity. I think it really was an amazing period in time where, because we lived together, I think that was one of the real unique issues. That at the end of the day, it wasn't just that there were, you know, disabled people with different types of disabilities. People who had met each other before, but we lived together. And that living together, even though the conditions were not ideal, you know, everyone came with a goal. And so a friend of mine who's a sign language interpreter, was saying that, like, it was the first time that the deaf community and other parts of the disability community ever really lived and worked together in a harmonious, not that there was tension, but I mean, really learned how to be supportive of each other. So I think it was an exceptional period of time that we haven't seen again. And I think it's one of the reasons we decided to stay in the building, because we really knew that if we left the building, that we would never be able to do what we needed to do because of the accessibility problems. So Kitty and I had kind of quietly talked about maybe we should think about not leaving. And then really, as we were showing with Joe Maldonado, they knew nothing about what we were talking about. So it was really easy to get people revved up because nobody was prepared, and we were really prepared.
We have a mic that's going to go around. There are a lot of hands up. We're going to try, we have about 10 more minutes, so we're going to try to get as many questions in as possible. But please wait for the mic before you ask your question. So here.
Judy, you're a national treasure. Thank you. And thank you, Nicole and Jim, for making this film and for hosting. You've given me a sense of where I come from with this film. Thank you. I never had that before tonight, so thank you very much. I want to, and I hope the world sees this film. Every school child and adult in America needs to see this movie. I'm curious about what you think the role of art, this is a piece of art now, right, can do as the tip of the spear to make things happen. I think it was mentioned that they made this room accessible because this film was and entered this space, and the bodies followed this film. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about the power of art to drive the change as part of the activism.
What do you think? You're an
Well,
artist.
fuck yeah, no, totally.
You're an artist.
But like,
No, I don't mean that.
again,
I mean,
it took
yeah.
this for these people to acknowledge that something needed to change. So what the fuck happened? I have so many feelings. Anyway, I just want to ask more questions. But yes, art is it. I just want to hear what you had to say about it because I want to be in your life more.
I want to what? Whatever wants to be. Okay.
I want to carry on what you've done. It's so fucking important. I just want to do more.
I think everyone in this. Okay, how many of you are from New York? How many of you are living in New Jersey and want to be from New York? So I say that in a very serious way. As New Yorkers, we all, I believe, have within ourselves this ability to fight forward or not. And I think that's really part of the spirit that was going on in Berkeley, is you had frustrated disabled people who were not being heard, who came together to work on this. But as I said earlier, so many of you are artists here, and one of the many areas where Jimmy needs to be credited is his continual fight in his work, not just in his professional work, but the work that he's done with Sundance and many, many, many other companies. And it really is why I was mentioning earlier the need for some type of an organization where people who have disabilities and who are working on inclusion of disability in the media can come together to really be demanding these changes. And there's so many things that need to change, but I mean, we're not going to have time tonight, but I'm really curious about why this film has meant something to you as disabled people and as non-disabled people. Because I think for me, the message is, it's a fantastic film. It's a historic film. It will live on forever because of the quality of the work. But the question, I think, is, how do we take this film and continue to make the changes that this film is all about? And that's really something within each of us, but also one of the values of this film is that it was nobody doing things by ourselves. It was people doing things together. And I do feel that we are in a different place now than we were. And so the unity of voices demanding, inclusion in a meaningful way, I think the time is right, but we have to capture it.
Judy, Jim, as someone who's worked at Jened, what comes through for me is the spirit of Jened right from 1968 right to today. And for that, I have to thank you. The spirit that was there in the beginning is still here, and that's what's going to change this world today. Thank you.
Hi, I was a counselor at Camp Jened for 2 summers, and thank you.
What's your name?
And it was in Gail. It was Gail Kapner at the time. Gail Kapner at the time. Now it's Gail Kadetsky, my husband. I met him there. But what I wanted to bring out when you were saying how things were just starting to get the pictures of the movies and the kids seeing themselves, I was in girls' teen camp, and I was always taking pictures of my girls. Denise was one of them, Bobby was one of them. And one of the girls was so shocked when I kept taking pictures of her, and I asked her what the big deal was, and she said, well, everybody I know stopped taking pictures of me once I got in a wheelchair. So being at Jened was a whole new world for her and for me, and this just made it wonderful for everybody to see how wonderful the kids were there and how happy they were. Thank you.
We're going to take a couple in the back.
Hi, oh, that's loud. So I'm a New Yorker, and I'm a Crip, and I didn't get to go to Jened, but I did go to a Crip camp. So I want to thank you as a Crip who went to a Crip camp, as a New Yorker, as someone who sits on all your shoulders, for all your kick-ass stuff. I mean, I've gotten to hear bits and pieces of our American disability rights history, the way that we put it all together over the years, but now it's here for everybody to see it. We can just say, just watch Crip Camp. Watch the whole fucking thing, and you'll know what we're about, what it is. We don't have to spend our lives directing people to all the wonderful books and the, disability studies curriculum. Just fucking watch Crip Camp. It's even AD'd, okay? It's even got audio description. Just watch it, and now the whole world will know forever what disability rights is about, and I'm so grateful, and I thank you.
I must say you really riled the crowd up because they're saying fuck a lot. That's a good
My
barometer.
mother used to always say,
What's that?
My mother used to say when I said that, is that how we raised you to only know those words?
Time for two more. Let's keep them in the back so people have a chance to. Does somebody else have a mic? I can't really see. Yeah.
Could you all give your names?
Hi, my name is Dominic Bradley, and I just wanted to be in conversation with one of the questions that was asked before it was opened up to the audience about so-called tensions between different movements. I think that the language and framing around disability has been different in communities of color. But the resistance of oppression around disability exists in various forms and has existed in various forms. We don't always use the same language or the same framing, but that history of resistance is there if you look for it. And the evidence of cross-disability solidarity and solidarity at the intersection of many different issues of social concern is there if you look for it. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. My name's Ezra. I'm an artist and disabled and Jewish and Brooklyn, born and raised. So I feel you, you know. New York is really a special place. I think it's like historically driven to create change. I think so many of us have had opportunities to like learn about that, and of course this film is giving us so much more. What I want to bring up is what I'm experiencing as an artist in New York, working within disability communities, is that we are so reliant on the hierarchies within the art worlds, and of course the decision makers who are non-disabled, who are more than often not, white folks who are affluent and are literally like not on the ground floor of the buildings. So they don't think about what we need, how we can connect with the representation and culture that we exist in, that we want to see in sort of all the intersectional ways that you were just bringing up before, like how we, what was striking to me was the way it was sort of this grassroots movement that was depicted in this film. And what I'm experiencing in New York is that we don't have that because of the more like stratified systems that keep us shut out, that we're all trying to, we can't go to see each other on the subways. Most of us don't live near each other. The institutions will only speak with us if you're sort of presentable and have degrees that you can then speak with them. So these are privileges that I have, and of course, like I believe, there's so much more room to work on in creating more space. So I'm wondering like what your advice is for the kind of emerging artists working around disability and accessibility in speaking power, truth to power to the people in power with the money in the cultural institutions that are also taking money from really gross people who are often part of the disabling of us in society.
I just have to
So my question is, what words of advice can you give to the emerging activists, the ones who are sitting on your shoulders, and we don't have the same grassroots movement, even though we live in a world where we can connect virtually? Yeah.
Thank you for all of that. I think that what you speak to is a message that everybody needs to hear that's in this room, is that it's so important to be in the room. And that if we are not in the room or we're not expected to show up, then you're part of our oppression. And that the world of disability is, as we've been hearing a lot of different things talked about this evening, is multifaceted. It is a wide open world full of art, full of passion, full of love, and full of power and knowledge that needs to be shared with the rest of the world. So people in this room that have control over small things in your lives, large things in your organizations, if we're not there, it's time for you to ask why. And if we're not there, you have to figure out how to make it happen.
So
I also think that, when you Simi Linton, where are you? So Simi, Simi is one person, who. How did I say that? Oh, I thought I did something wrong.
SIMI.
Sorry. I'm like, oh my God. But I just wanted to say, that Simi has been doing, and I'm not singling her out above anybody else, but I just know Simi longer, and she's just done a wealth of work. And I think one of the issues for me is consistency and our being able to look at ways of telling our stories. And if you read the paper that I wrote, you'll see that one of the real purposes of it is to allow organizations like the Center for Asian Americans in Media. I think they're a great group, and when I met with them, they were not intentionally not including disability, but like all of these organizations said to me, they just didn't know about the stories. And so, organizations like Rooted in Rights, which I think is doing some very good work in telling stories. I do something called the human perspective, very kind of simple things that are going on. But telling our stories and reaching out to these other organizations to help share with them stories from different communities. Because I think there's a lot of teaching that needs to go on. I mean, we absolutely need to be more demanding, but I think in addition to being more demanding, we need to recognize that the absence of disability in media, and I do hold the broad field of media responsible for poor representation, also inadequate representation, and representing us in so many ways as being poor, pathetic cripples who really want to kill ourselves and die because our lives are so terrible. But we have a responsibility to really break this down. The film is a great beginning, but then you need to take people, I believe, in your communities, and we need to help people tell their stories. Because, when Justin Dart went around the country, and he did that 2 or 3 times, and he had people coming and telling their stories, any one of you in this room, we knew that those stories were just scratching the surface, because people were afraid, personally, in many ways, to think about their problems, to think about the impact of discrimination. So I think we have a responsibility to help people learn how to really tell our stories. And then those stories also can be put into the hands of people who are producing, musicals and plays and news at 6 o'clock at night and on social media. But we have to have our voices really being heard. And I think the other thing I really believe in response to part of what you were saying is we need to be writing to the people that are giving out the money and are doing all this work and ask, where are we? We kind of complain amongst ourselves, but I think we really need to be doing it in a much broader way. And I also want to say that I think there are some good things that are beginning to happen with organizations like Pop Culture and Firelight, and other groups that have been willing to take I think we kind of insisted. And they were then willing to really talk with us more, and also giving them names and suggestions of people that they could begin to talk with and learn from. So, I mean, we could talk for days about this, but I think at the end of the day, each one of you has a responsibility to do something, even if it's just in your local community. Talk about where are the stories of disability? Where are the disabled characters? You can count. I watch TV, I'm old-fashioned, I still watch TV. And when you look at advertisements, the racial diversity has gotten so much more than when I was growing up. And every once in a while, you'll see a disabled person, right? But nothing in comparison. So we need to demand more.
So, to your point, who here thinks that there should be a fiction series about Camp Jeanette on Netflix? That was a little shameless, but I took the opportunity. Anyway, I want to thank Judy and Nicole and Jim so much.